everybody, my name is Chase Pipes, and you're watching Chasing History, brought to you by the American Digger Magazine and the Smoky Mountain Relic Room, and we're back out west with our buddy Ty, and we have got, I'm sure you can see what's behind us, this is some kind of epic. We are on a pioneer homestead in western Colorado from the late 1800s, early 1900s. There's a lot of history tied up with these old homesteads, especially the aspect of the native history of it. How is it that this property got homestead?
Late 1880s, this was all Ute reservation. They had a uprising. They pushed the Utes into a smaller area. They opened this up for homesteading, and this family came in the year after to a house that's down the canyon, and the year after that, this house was built as the other brother moved in and homesteaded here.
So as a consequence of the war with the U.S., the Utes lost a good portion of their reservation, which this was a part of, and that opened this area up for homesteading.
It did.
So what is homesteading? How did that work back then? I mean, could you literally just walk into a place and just go, mine?
Pretty much. The U.S. government owned all the property.
Okay.
You could, I believe it was $5, and you would get a section which was 140 acres. You'd come stake it. You had to do a certain amount of improvements and live here for 5 years, and it was yours.
Whoa. So you would pay a fee.
A filing fee.
A filing fee, and then you would go onto the land, stake out your property, and then you had to do X amount of improvements and stay on it for 5 years, and then boom, it was yours.
It was yours, yes.
That's so crazy.
And one of the weird things about this, and we can show you some pictures later on, is a lot of this property in the West never got homesteaded. It's property that wasn't very productive. It was desert. It was badlands. We've talked about that in the past, a lot of area that people didn't want. This area we're in here, this nice, beautiful, fertile valley, they homesteaded down through the middle of it, but the sides all around it is BLM. It's still public lands all the way around it, except for this one area here that had a little bit of water. So they homesteaded where the water was at, and then they grazed out from it. So basically, by staking the water, they owned the whole mountain.
And is that how the U.S. got such a vast amount of public lands? That's the land that was left over?
That's the land that nobody wanted.
Nobody wanted.
Nobody wanted.
And so they just said, fine, boom, it's public.
At one point, I'm not sure in Colorado, I mean, it was like 1978. In Alaska, you could still homestead up until 1978.
So that whole process that we just described, this is so mind-boggling. Up into the late 70s, you could still do that.
Yeah.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
That's so cool. Yeah. So, all right, so the family came in, they staked out their place. What were the types of living that people who were doing this, what were they farming? Were they grazing animals? What were they?
This is a little bit high for most farming. This would have been grazing. I know they were raising sheep originally here. It's cows now.
Yeah.
They would have showed up in a covered wagon, and probably first thing they would have done is start building the cabin. They would have used the natural trees, the stuff that's here, the rock and the trees that were actually on site to build their first cabin to stay in.
Like the one that we've got behind us.
And this one here is actually, and we'll take a better look at it, the original cabin is kind of in the center of this, and they've added on and built onto it over the years and expanded it to more rooms. So it went from a one-room cabin that the whole family lived in to a one-room with a kitchen to a one-room with a bedroom to a,
just as they could afford it, they added on.
And as they could, they could work it.
What's wild is that here in the 21st century, you can walk out to places where there are still these original homestead buildings standing. The reason why this is still standing is because this is such an arid and dry place to live in, and that the family lived there until the late 1950s, early 1960s. And so they maintained it and kept it up. The same family that homesteaded this still lives on this property, still ranches on this property, only they live 30, 40 miles away. So let's check out some of the details about the house, all right? Come on, this is cool. So, Ty, this is the front of the cabin. The old road cuts right in front of us right here.
It does, yeah.
And we've got some rock work and stuff going on. So what are they trying to do here? This is a lot of work.
It is a lot of work. This would have been down the road. This would have been the first thing they did. This is trying to make it home. This is trying to make it livable and make it nice. They built a rock wall to try to keep a nice level front yard. They built this stairs, which, I mean, it took a lot of work to bring these big rocks in to build a stairway up. And then they did the same stairway up into the house and used the same native rock as the foundation around the house.
That's just super cool. And that's something that shows that, and that's a key feature of a homestead, that they've been there for a long time. Yeah. On a homestead that they maybe lived 5-10 years at, you wouldn't get this type of feature, would you?
No, they wouldn't. This is long term. I mean, the first 5, 10, 20 years was survival.
Yeah.
That was trying to get enough to eat, trying to have enough money to pay bills or be able to buy a few things. This is when you had a little bit of spare time.
Right. So we look at the cabin back here. So I mean, is this like Lincoln logs, basically? I mean, how are they constructing this?
Yeah, I mean, this is all pine logs that they've harvested here on site off this property. And you can see the axe marks all over them. This was all done by hand.
Yeah.
And I mean, you probably know better than me the actual construction, but so what they've done is they've dovetailed it. They've chiseled the logs so that they fit together tight to try to get as least gap as they can, and also to make it more stable and sturdy.
Right. So this type of construction is one of the easiest types of construction. The log construction goes back to the Swedish immigrants that came into the country. The Swedes are the ones that really educated, the English and the Scotch-Irish on log cabin construction, especially some of the fancier stuff that we see, like the chimney or the dovetail or any of the other joints. It's basically the simplest way to construct a house, because what you're doing is you've got straight trees, and it's so easy to just cut that tree down and lay it this and stack them one on top of the other, interlocking here with this. And that takes a lot of work to do. If you notice the doorway here, how they would do this is, and keep these logs straight, they would put a big post. Behind this is going to be a solid beam that they would put, and then they would take nails. If it was, the 18th century, they would have used wooden pegs, but, this is the turn of the century, so they had nails and stuff that had brought with them, that had driven nails into here so that those logs are resting on that nail up against this post, and that keeps a level frame. This is a super, super cool house, and same thing with the doorways here. What's fascinating is the chinking. Originally, back in the 18th century, chinking would have been a yearly thing that they would have done. They would have, put the chinking in the fall, and then it would have kept the house real nice and warm and tight throughout the winter. And then in the early spring to summer, they would knock all the chinking out so that you get airflow through the house. Now that kind of faded out in the 1820s, 30s, 40s, where chinking became more permanent. But what's fascinating about this is that they knocked out, probably in the 30s, 40s, 50s, they knocked out the old mud chinking and they put in concrete chinking, which, that's kind of thing that you get in a lot of these Western homesteads, or especially around the turn of the century, because they have access to modern tools and modern equipment. And why not use concrete?
Always upgrading, always getting a little better, a little bigger, a little more.
Yeah. So, Ty, you were talking earlier about how, this would originally have been a 1 or 2 room cabin, and then they expanded it. What are the things that you look for to show that?
One of the things that you can see right here is the thickness of this wall.
Uh-huh.
Now, why would they build an interior wall 14 inches thick? Right. This wall would have been an exterior wall at one time. This would be big logs. That's why it's so thick right here, is because this room would have been the original structure. So this would have been the exterior wall, and they've just come in and put sheeting over the top of it.
Okay,
and they expanded the house.
So the room I'm standing in would have originally been the outside of the house.
Yeah.
And then what you're standing in, it would have been the original cabin that would have been built here.
And just added that on.
That's so cool. So just imagine being in a place being in a one-room cabin for, a year, 2 years, 5 years, and finally, you decide to add on, and just how big of a deal that would have been to somebody out here. Because, I mean, guys, we're not near nothing.
No.
I mean, there's nothing near here. We were on a dirt road for the longest time to even get out here. So, I could only imagine what it was like on a horse or in a Model T or something like that. So being able to expand your home is a big deal. Another way that you can tell that this is the original outside wall, there's a hole down here that a critter had cut. And if you look down into the hole, this is how Chase dies. If you look in the hole, you can see the round logs down inside there. So this little critter opening allowed us to examine to confirm what Ty suspected as the original outside of the place. So, are we allowed to film here?
We are. We have permission to be here. This is actually a fossil lease that I picked up. We have permission from the landowner to be here. He has had a little bit of trouble with people coming in here.
This is a little ominous.
we just noticed the warning. Don't shoot in buildings. Don't shoot the post or power pole or buildings. I hope you can read. If not, Susie shoots. I don't know who Susie is.
Who's Susie? Where?
But
where?
Don't piss Susie off. She shoots.
Where? We need to find Susie.
We need to
make
find
sure
Susie.
to steer clear of Susie.
What's on that locket you got? Was it an S?
It was an F.
It was an F.
F.
It wasn't
yeah.
Wasn't Susie's
oh, man. God, you imagine taking Susie's locket?
Oh, geez.
Don't screw around in these old places. So...
they had a little more trouble here than we thought they did.
And we apparently have trouble reading.
Well, it's scratched in. It's a little bit rough. But it actually says don't shit in the buildings. They've had a little bit more trouble with people being disrespectful than we thought.
Yeah. We thought it said shoot, but it says shit. So let's not shit in the building or shoot around or piss Susie off.
Yeah.
This is a pretty cool feature. This is in the original part of the cabin, and this is probably the original kitchen that was set up.
It would have been an early one for sure.
Because you've got, the enamelware table right here to prep food, and you've got the enamel sink right here. And what's fascinating is that there's no pipes going to this sink, so that means they hand carried.
There's a hole underneath that probably went to a bucket, but there's no running water.
Yeah. And that's a common feature in a lot of these. We think everybody had indoor plumbing and stuff. So that means every single day you are carrying your water up here. You're carrying your water to drink. You're carrying your water to bathe. You're carrying your water to cook with. All of that. And to just be here in this old kitchen is just imagine how many meals have taken place
Stories it could tell.
or the stories that it could tell. But it's still here and it's still intact. It's in pretty rough shape, but it's a neat feature to this old cabin.
One of the neat things that you can see in this old house is this is called wainscoting. This is a decorative only thing that they did, but this was in 1800s. You see this, if you watch an old Western in the saloons, you'll always see this in the background in the saloons.
That's a really cool feature. And is it because it's just so easy to put in?
It's just an easy way to make it decorative, yeah. And I mean, at one point it would have been just log walls, rough walls. So that's an easy way to make it a little bit cleaner, a little bit nicer.
So maybe they were in town and saw this in one of the saloons or in one of the other stores and were like, that would look good in the cabin. That's pretty cool. That's pretty cool. Ty, how important is the types of logs that they would have used? Does that make a big difference, or were they just grabbing any tree that they had at hand?
The initial building, they would have been quickest, easiest they could. And one thing you'll notice as we walk around this building is the original part of the cabin is cottonwood, which doesn't last as long as pine and some of the harder woods do. But the bottom of this canyon would have probably been cottonwoods because there was water here. So they used the trees that were closest, easiest, and the rest of the additions are pine, which would have had to have been harvested and brought in from a farther distance later on.
Well, we see some of these pines up off in the hill, but we don't see any cottonwoods around.
There's no cottonwoods at all left in here at all. No.
So, because we're in the middle of a big valley and cottonwoods like water, and cottonwoods typically ran along old waterways.
We're going to follow the water, the stream beds, things like that. Yeah.
So the valley that we're looking at isn't the valley that they would have noticed.
It would have looked a lot different back then. The grass would have been waist deep. There would have been cottonwoods. It would have been a lot more lush than it is now. After 100 years of sheep and cows and farming practices, now the grass is this tall. There's no cottonwoods left.
See, that's a thing that you've got to think about, whether you're, out west, like, here on an old homestead, or back east. The landscape that you're seeing has been completely altered. It is not the landscape. No matter how beautiful that view is or how gorgeous that panorama is, that landscape has been completely altered through the 18th, 19th, 20th, and even 21st century people. So that's really cool that, you can use a diagnostic like this to tell you what kind of things were present in this valley, so that there would have originally been a row of cottonwoods going all down through this valley,
down the creek,
that they were harvested first to build this, and because water isn't very prevalent here, they never grew back.
Well, that sheep like to eat cottonwoods. So all the saplings got ate as they
got ate by sheep.
Yep.
That's a cool feature. One of the neat things about old pioneer properties like this, old homesteads, is the amount of outbuildings that they would have had. Today we've kind of got everything sort of condensed to our houses. We've got a garage where we keep our tools and stuff, but back then they would have had it in a separate building. Why is that?
Well, you've got a couple different reasons. One, you don't want the livestock living next to your house. You don't necessarily want the lambs right up against your house crying all night.
Right.
Another is, fire safety back then was a big deal, because the fire department isn't going to show up and put everything out. All your heat's by fire, your cooking's by fire, everything's by fire.
And everything's made with wood.
So you want to have things spread out a little bit just in case of that as well.
I got you. So you've got a little building like this to house stuff. One thing we can use to kind of diagnose what this building is there's a bin where we've got some pieces of coal, which is pretty cool. So this coal lets us also know that they heated their home with coal instead of wood, which is a really fascinating choice. You'd think wood would be easier, but I guess...
You would think wood would be easier, but I'm assuming the wood is from the later time period, the 50s,
right.
50s, 60s, they would have been using the coal.
The coal, yeah, that makes
bringing
sense.
it in a lot easier.
That'd make sense. So there seems to be like a little tool shed back
there's a lot
here.
of parts, tools, or the typical nailed jars up on the walls. They used everything. They didn't throw anything away.
Right.
They kept it because you might need it for something. They used it for whatever they could use it for. The roof of this building tells a story right here of how many different generations of patching and repairing and using whatever they had to get by and make do.
And see, that seems to be a theme that recurs itself over and over again on these old homesteads. Is they were literally using whatever they had, because you were a long way away from a store.
Yeah, if you needed a bolt, a nut, a nail, a sheet of something, you didn't run to the store. You used what you had.
Yeah.
And these places, there's very few of these ranches that were productive enough that they had spare money.
Right.
They were always tight. They were always had a bunch of kids. They were always... you never knew if they'd have a crop next year or what would happen next year. So they didn't spend frivolously if they could help it.
They were really smart in coming up with very creative ways to make do all the way out here in the wilderness.
Yep.
Cool. One of the things that you'll notice about every old turn of the century, or even 1920s, 30s, 40s site that you'll visit is there will always be a room where they have all kinds of just everything that's metal that you can imagine is going to be in one place, because they could reuse that. Come here and check this out. In this room, we have got everything from different size nuts and bolts. There's a whole tray of nothing but nuts and bolts. There's every kind of metal that you can imagine in here. And this isn't thrown in here as like a big trash dump or something like that. This stuff is here on purpose because that rancher who's on this property may need some of this one day. There's everything from a little horn of some sort to a broken fan, for whatever reason. Little tins, this box of nuts and bolts. I mean, he may have a part break on a piece of equipment to where he can come in this shed, go through his old bin, and then boom, your thing's fixed. And that's the thing is that these guys were genius, beyond genius, what they could do with just a pile of bolts and some miscellaneous rods and stuff. So keep that in mind. Every time that you go look for an old house site, any Pioneer or Homestead property worth its salt is gonna have a pile of this kind of stuff sitting there, and it's always fun to go through because they saved a lot of cool stuff. We found some files in here, we found some old scissors, a knife, just neat stuff. So this is one really important thing to keep your eye out for. So yeah, super cool. I love these rooms. God, I love these rooms. So this is another neat feature that we've got. We've got a couple other cabins behind us. What were these cabins would have been?
If I'm not mistaken, this was actually for the hired help. They had a couple extra workers that were, you know, cowboys that ran the range and ran the cattle and the sheep and stuff, and this was where one of them would stay.
Because, I mean, you know, you're running several thousand acres plus all of the public land that surrounded this ranch. So, I mean, you're talking tens of thousands of acres, and not one family could have done it all.
They almost all these ranches, in order to grow, had to have hired help at some point.
Okay, and then they would have built little cabins like this for the hired help. What's really fascinating about this cabin is, and this is one of the neatest features I've ever seen, and it goes back to show you just how ingenious and doing the best that you can with what you had at hand is what's on here. Ty, what is going on with these little shingle-like things?
What they've done is they've cut canned and tobacco tins open, flatten them out, and use them for shingling and using them for plating on this. The owner told me they did the door because they had a problem with bears trying to get in this cabin. So this was to help keep the bears out. But they used, I mean, once again, whatever they had on hand, they used all that time and energy to cut those cans flat and use them like shingles.
So I want you to imagine that you have a bear problem going on. You're like, how do we keep the bear from tearing down the wooden door? I know, let's take that bean can or sauerkraut or whatever kind of can that they've got, and let's cut the top and the bottom off, cut it long ways, open it up, and nail it to the side of the cabin. That is absolute genius. And what's wild is we've kind of looked around anywhere that they, you know, there was a gap or there was a hole, they were using these little cans or tins to do it.
This is almost a signature thing of this ranch. I've not seen this anywhere before, and there's a few buildings that have this on it here.
Yeah, I've never seen it. I've never seen it done anywhere else either. What else is really cool is we were digging around, and guess what we found?
We found shingles in the making.
We found shingles in the making. There's over 100 of these tobacco tins. Velvet pipe and cigar tobacco tins that they were taking the tops and the bottoms off, and they were using them for these shingles right here. That's probably one of the coolest things that we found is just these in the making, buried under a floorboard somewhere. That's just super, super cool. Neat cabin, and yeah, of course, you've got to have a space for your hired help. And, you know, the cans here, that's just another ingenious method that these guys were doing in order to survive.
One of the things that we noticed about this building that's kind of neat is, if you notice, this window frame does not match the window. So they built this window with the intention of having a bigger window in it, whether it got broke and they had to use a salvage piece in here, or whether they just build it whatever they had in their head and then use whatever they had down the road, but they had to fill in part of the gap. Once again, it just shows that they're salvaging using whatever is on hand.
Oh yeah, well, they could have had a smaller piece of glass than what they initially thought, or part of the glass could have gotten broke, and then they cut the glass to fit and then shrunk the window up. But it's just, it shows you these guys, they're not messing around. They were ingenious and did a lot of genius on-site stuff to fix in order to make a living out here in the wilds. Here we've got a couple of other buildings, probably, you know, for ranch hands or ranch staff or something like that. But there again, they're doing ingenious things in order to put these buildings together. Here we've got, you know, again, the tin again, going between the cracks of this wood As the wood shrank, as they added, they probably would have cut this wood green, and as it shrank, gaps would have formed, so they used the tin to fill in the blanks. What else do we got?
Well, I mean, you got, once again, the salvage. The hinges are different. They don't match. I mean, it's just, everything on these buildings is just whatever they have in hand. It's kind of amazing to see. This door on this building right here, they reinforced the door with
metal.
I mean, that stuff out of the shed that they were saving for a purpose. You know, it's just everything on these was just what they had on hand.
And that's just again and again and again, these guys were doing what they could with what they had on hand. And just makes, you know, for every one of these sites that you're going to go to is different. And each site is going to have something that's totally unique to its site. You know, like this tin can thing. Never seen it before, never seen it on another site. This is unique to this ranch. On other places, other homesteads that you go visit, kind of keep your eye out for something that's really uniquely that particular property. So this is neat. We got a few more buildings to show, and then we're going to close up the episode. So hang on, we're almost done. This is probably one of the most important buildings, you know, or structures on this entire ranch. Ty, what kind of building do we have here?
This is what we just call a dugout.
Okay.
I mean, they would have dug it into the hill, and it's pretty common that you see they use rock because it lasts longer in the ground than the wood did.
Yeah.
And it was built into the hill to keep regulating the temperature. So this would have been for food storage.
Okay. So back east, we call them root cellars. But your biggest thing that you would have had is up here, winters are harsh. Yeah. I mean, we're what, 7,000?
Like 7,800 feet right here.
We're almost 8,000 feet up. So, I mean, it's harsh to begin with. But you really had to prepare for wintertime. And you really had to make sure that food was going to survive and make it. So you would dig into the ground where you could get the temperature of that ground, where it would stay cool during the summer and warm during the wintertime, because when you burrow into the ground pretty much stays the same temperature year round. So they could store stuff, and they earthed it up on the side with earth on the side and rocks on a wall, and that's how we can tell exactly what type of building this is. But this was the single most important building on this entire property.
This was your food for the winter. I mean, in the fall, the women, I mean, they always say the women, I think it was more the whole family.
Yeah, the whole family.
But would can all the vegetables from their garden. You didn't just go to the store and buy a bunch of canned goods. You bottled for months everything you possibly could put in a bottle to save and store and get you through to the next year. And that went in here, and that was your survival.
Yep. And every old homestead that you go to, every old, you know, settler's place or whatever, you are going to find one of these root cellars. So be on the look for that. It's a cool feature. Ty, this is a really interesting set of buildings that we have here, and it doesn't look like it goes with, you know, the family stuff, the living stuff.
No, it's quite a ways away, and it's kind of in a shelter protected spot up here. The owner told me this was a lambing shed. Okay. So in the spring they'd bring the sheep in and they'd put the lambs and the ewes in here to have their babies to try to protect them. They were that important that they built a shed just to take care of those.
So this is another diagnostic feature to show us what kind of living, what kind of ranching was going on here.
Ranch,
so they were doing sheep, they were doing lambs, and this is where they would bring their lambs, their pregnant sheep in to have babies, basically. Yeah. That is a really cool feature to this site. And, you know, it goes back to, you know, how important it is to take care of this stuff, because you can see, look, one over there is already completely on the ground.
Just about.
This one's about totally on the ground. That's how precious these places are. They're not going to last for very long, which is why it's important to protect these places and to save them, you know, before they fall down. This one's just too far gone. Ty, this is an interesting part of the building. What's going on with this?
This is the far end of the lambing shed. Okay. And it looks like there's some big troughs underneath this. And what I think is this is the original road that came in here.
Okay, so this is the original road
that came
running
in
right
this
here.
place.
Okay.
And I believe this swung around and they would put feed in it and swing it back, and it would go through these funnels down in the feed troughs to fill up feed for the lambs that were here.
Oh, that's so cool. So they would bring their truck back from town full of feed. They got a bunch of hungry pregnant lambs in here about to give birth. Fill it, swing it,
around. Yep.
drop it. That is so cool. And again, look on top of the shed.
Yeah.
The roof is made of paint cans.
I think it's lard cans and paint cans that they've cut, flattened out, and used to shingle the roof of this building.
That's just so genius. I love that. That's one of the coolest things I've seen at any place. Here's a cool building up here.
Yeah.
This is another really unique structure and just shows to the ingenuity of it. This is kind of higher up, so I don't know if this would have been a lambing shed, maybe.
This
maybe
looks
not.
like maybe more for horses or something. It's a little low, but I'm not sure what it is.
But what's really cool is this back wall feature. Now, you've got a hillside coming down, which means you've got a lot of pressure and a lot of erosion coming down that hill. And when you build buildings, you're going to have that pressure build up and build up and build up. Yeah. So the ingenious thing that they did is they went in here and they cut down a tree and laid a tree down to be that back wall, and they laid it up against another tree and built.
That was a live tree that they built the building around. And a stump of another tree.
In order to reinforce this building. So that's using the landscape to completely reinforce this building and to hold it in place. I mean, just absolute genius what these guys were doing. You know, the thing that we don't keep in mind is that how important places like these are to not only American history, but to world history as well. Because what you got to keep in mind is that there were immigrants coming from all over the world to come and settle here. You know, if you've been in the United States for 100 years, guaranteed your family came over on a boat. And this is part of that story. And that's another reason why we should save these places and take care of them. Not only because they're really cool buildings, I mean, yeah, but because it's a huge part of our story. When we go to places like this, it gives us perspective that we normally wouldn't have. And it's perspective that you can't get from watching a movie or perspective that you can't get from reading it in a book. You actually got to come to these places in order to get that perspective. And that's why we save history. That's why it's so important to take care of history, is because it is our perspective on how we live our lives by looking at the past and making sure that we do a good job so that we have a good future.
Thinking back 100 years ago, just think about how many times kids or the adults sat on these steps.
Yeah.
And it gives you a little bit of perspective when you look around, because when you look around the ground, what do you see? You see bottle caps and bullet casings. Yeah. There wasn't a lot for entertainment out here, except for sitting here on the front porch drinking beer and shooting prairie dogs.
Yeah. And there's a ton of prairie dogs. This is one of the coolest places that you've taken us to, man. This is epic. What's cool is that it's still in the family, but there's a lot of these places that are, you know, off on public lands or other places. Yeah. How should people treat old structures and buildings and homesteads like this?
Anything historical, leave them as you find them. I mean, don't tear them up. You don't tear up the wood for firewood. You don't tear the place apart for souvenirs and relics.
Write your name on the wall.
Write your name on the wall. You know, shoot them up. I mean, it's just leave them for the next group of people to see and enjoy.
Yeah. And this is why historical places are important. You know, this is a time capsule which, you know, chronicles the life of the family that lived here. And what it does is it gives us perspective on our life. That is what history does. That is what it is all about. We can come here and we can see how these people lived. We can walk through the rooms. We can, you know, explore it, and we can just imagine how hard they would have had to work to, you know, make a living out here, trying to struggle to survive. And it gives us perspective on our lives today in the present and makes us appreciate what we have. So when you're out and exploring and looking around and, you know, whatever, and you come across stuff like this, which there are, how many do you know of? There's
hundreds of them. I've run across hundreds of them over the years. They're getting fewer and fewer all the time. All it takes is one wildfire to come through here, and these will be gone. The public lands, they're disappearing really, really fast, both from vandalism and from wildfires.
So be sure to take care of them, I guess, is the moral of the story. You know, we're lucky, you know, we've got, this is on private property, and this is the rancher's family homestead, and he wants to take care of it, ensure that it doesn't fall down. He's right now in the process of putting roofs over a lot of the buildings in order to save them, for future generations to see and to enjoy and to appreciate. So, Ty, dude, thank you so much for having us out here, man. This is cool.
It's fun.
This has been awesome. And thank you guys for watching. We really appreciate you guys watching this episode of Chasing History. If you if you like this episode, please click that like button. If you really enjoy our series, please subscribe. Do us a favor, spread the word. Let people know that we exist. Share it on your social media. Tell it to a friend. Just scream it to the world. Chase, that history is freaking awesome. And there's this nuts dude on YouTube that likes to talk about it. Like, anything you guys can do to help us out, we would appreciate it. And remember, respect old places like this. Don't write your name on the wall. Take good care of it. Take photos, not souvenirs. Leave the artifacts where they are so that other people can come, enjoy, and appreciate it. And remember, guys, history rocks. Woohoo!
Okay.
Got it straight? Wait a minute, hold on. I gotta get mine straight. What is this?
You took so long.
Action?
I told you. Action.
This means go. This means go. Okay, now we know this means go. What is this?
No, you know
Is
movies.
this like dog pictures, or is that your action?
Take two. Act.
Okay, all right. Let's try this a third time. Want to see my nut? There's two of them. Here's my nuts. Plural. That's a blooper.